Samaila Zubairu, President and CEO of AFC, Aliko Dangote, Chairman and CEO of the Dangote Group, business executives and global partners, leaders of our development financial institutions, ladies and gentlemen. In Africa, the Africa We Build Summit is a profound opportunity to turn potential into action by forging partnerships, unlocking finance, and building continental synergy. Kenya is honored to partner with the Africa Finance Corporation and the African Union Commission to host this inaugural summit, shifting from aspiration and dialogue to execution with clear outputs and implementation pathways. This is a strong start that brings together public and private sector leaders. Today marks a proud moment as we collectively aim to accelerate the mobilization of domestic and international capital towards infrastructure systems that enable large-scale industrialization. Notably, treating infrastructure as a standalone asset delivers little or no impact. Moving priority infrastructure from inception to tangible outcomes across Africa requires an integrated approach, linking roads, railways, ports, power, and digital networks to industrial parks and micro, small, and medium enterprises. This summit is timely for two key reasons. First, it coincides with the growing momentum in realization of the Agenda 2063, particularly the advancement of flagship programs like this Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Second, it takes place amid geopolitical disruptions to global and regional trade. Together, these factors underscore the urgent need for homegrown and proactive resource mobilization to finance Africa's development agenda. This therefore calls for a candid examination of the policy environment and strengthening of development finance institutions. It calls for harmonizing border trade measures and taking a collective view of development. Ladies and gentlemen, when we talk of a candid review, I can attest or speak without blinking that in this room today, we have two of the most candid speakers and leaders from our continent joining us so that they can invigorate this momentum. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the first of these leaders in the room, His Excellency Dr. William Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya, to deliver his keynote address.
Thank you very much. Let's take our seats. And thank you very much, PCS. Your Excellency, our elder in the region, Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, the President of the Republic of Uganda, Mr. Samaila Zubairu, our good friend, President and CEO of the Africa Finance Corporation, Ministers present, CEOs, distinguished participants, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome. I take this opportunity on behalf of the people and government of Kenya to welcome you all to Nairobi for this most consequential gathering that goes to the heart of our continent's future. The Africa Infrastructure Summit convened by the Africa Finance Corporation is a launchpad for what we want to see into the future as Africans. I also extend a very special welcome to the Africa Finance Corporation as it makes Nairobi its second home. Welcome to Nairobi. Kenya is immensely honored to host the AFC's first office outside its headquarters in Lagos. The theme of this conference, to my mind, is the most critical and vital conversation on our development as African nations and also as a continent. We meet against the backdrop of global economic shocks and disruptions arising from the war in the Gulf. From the war in Ukraine a few years to the war in the Gulf in a few weeks. Africa today produces approximately 10 million barrels of oil per day, which is about 10% of global output. Yet, paradoxically, we remain net importers of petroleum products to the tune of 120 million metric tons annually at a cost of about $90 billion. At an average export price of $75 per barrel, Africa's crude production is valued at roughly $270 billion each year. However, it is this same production, if this same production were refined domestically and exported as finished products at an average price of US $800 per ton, it would generate over $500 billion. This represents foregone income of about $230 billion, which is nearly 7.5% of our GDP from just one resource. This does not even account for the additional gains from downstream industries such as plastics and fertilizers, which we currently import and which we could add another 2 to 3% of our GDP. Excellencies, what point am I trying to make? Africa's place in global trade is defined by a structural imbalance that requires our urgent attention. According to the UN Trade and Development, the continent continues to export predominantly raw materials, minerals, fuels, and agricultural commodities, while importing the very products manufactured from those same resources. In many of our economies, over 60% of exports remain commodity-based, while we import nearly 3 times more manufactured goods than we export. It should not surprise us, therefore, that manufacturing has stagnated at about 10% of GDP for the last 2 decades. As long as this pattern persists, our growth will remain constrained, our economies will remain vulnerable, and our full potential will be unrealized. The leaders of the 50s and 60 years ago may be excused. Our continent then had a population of only 350 million people, largely rural and with limited purchasing power. Today, with a population of 1.5 billion people and a middle class of between 300 and 350 million people, we have no such excuse. We cannot continue to export raw materials and importing finished products made from them. The conversation we will have over the next 2 days must therefore be truly definitive on the way forward in terms of manufacturing and value addition. In this room, we have political leaders, we have industrialists, captains of industry, financiers, everyone required to move this agenda from aspiration to implementation. That is why I propose 3 key action points. First, we must strengthen our political resolve to deepen regional integration. Our countries possesses complementary endowments, including natural resources in one country, energy resources in another country, and an optimal location for industrial processing in the next country. This must be connected through infrastructure, roads, rail, ports, and electricity grids, so that raw materials and intermediate goods can move freely across borders. Equally important, the benefits of such integration must be shared equitably, ensuring that national boundaries do not impede the full realization of a common market with the free movement of goods, capital, and people. Second, we must establish regional platforms for strategic industries. It is worth recalling that the European Union began as the European Gold and Steel Community in 1951. Our East African community is richly endowed with renewable energy, the full spectrum of minerals driving the global energy transition, including copper, cobalt, nickel, manganese, graphite, lithium, and rare earth elements in Kenya, in Uganda, in Tanzania, in Burundi, in Rwanda, in DRC. We're all members of one community. I remember last evening talking to the president of Burundi on the possibilities that exist with the rich resources that exist in Burundi. I remember discussing with President Samia Suluhu this week. I put a phone call to President Museveni last week on this whole setup. And I want to thank you, Mzee, for finding time to be here. So that we can demonstrate leadership at the highest level to move this process forward. We must now move deliberately to pool these resources and position ourselves competitively in the global green manufacturing arena. However, we cannot achieve competitiveness without affordable energy, making large-scale investment in renewable energy an urgent priority, and ensuring that the resources that we have in our region, including the oil we have in Uganda, the little oil we have in Kenya, we must find the mechanism to leverage on these resources and drive our industrialization. Third, we must harness African capital. As the saying goes, he who pays the piper calls the tune. Industrialists here know the meaning of that phrase better than all of us. Our ambitions will remain unrealized if we continue to depend on external capital whose primary interest is securing raw materials for their own industries. We must say that with clarity. We must therefore strengthen our regional development finance institutions, including the Africa Finance Corporation. And I want to inform the Africa Finance Corporation fraternity that as you set up office in Nairobi, the Kenya government is going to enhance its equity by $25 million. As a demonstration of the confidence we have in African financial institutions. I know the president of Afrexim Bank is here with us. When I came into office, we enhanced our equity in Afrexim Bank by $40 million. I know my friend Tadesse is here. We have already discussed how Kenya, being among the highest shareholders of TDB Bank, how we are going to enhance our equity and shareholding in Trade and Development Bank. And we are doing it intentionally and deliberately because we know that they understand us better than anybody else. We do not have to explain ourselves in windy statements and languages. They understand us. They understand where we are. And they know us better than anybody else would. And I want to assure you that we will continue as leaders in this continent to build our own African financial institutions, give them the capacity. And I know we haven't done enough. You can count on us, we will do more. Until we develop the muscle for us to be able to drive our own industrialization and our own development. I say so with benefit of experience. And I will say this, why we must believe in ourselves. I want to say this with clarity. We must. If we are to make progress, it begins with us believing in ourselves. And this is a message I have been having a conversation with the people of Kenya. We must believe in ourselves. When I came into office, I will give you two examples, if you can indulge me. When I came into office, we had a serious fuel crisis in the country. There were queues in our petrol stations. The first lot of people to come to see me, even before I left my former office, were oil marketers. And they told me, Mr. President-elect, we are facing a stock out. We do not have dollars. We have a crisis. And it became my first assignment, maybe baptism by fire, on my first day in office. And we figured out with my team, how do we deal with this? And I remember reaching out to friends who, for this meeting I will not mention, good friends of mine who were running multinational banks and telling them, oh, we need to do this. Little did I know that many of them were already figuring out how they are going to make money when the dollar went to 200 shillings, Kenya shillings to a dollar. They're already thinking how to make money from foreign exchange. I mean, I'm looking at how do we solve a Kenyan problem. It is only one bank, one Kenyan bank, Kenya Commercial Bank, that was willing to issue letters of credit and stand with us at that very critical moment. Do you know what happened? We not only solved that problem in a very permanent way. Today we have a G2G framework that many other countries have come to learn from us. Malawi have been here to learn from us. Burundi have been here to learn from us how we did it. So we solved the problem. But you know what? Kenya Commercial Bank made tons of money in the process. Their share price went from 17 shillings to now 74 shillings. You know, if there was a case for believing in ourselves, Kenya Commercial Bank, being a Kenyan bank, believed in us. We believed in them. The outcome is a win-win. We not only solved our problem, but we built our bank even more. That's one example. Example number two. When I made a proposition to the people of Kenya on a matter that has been with us for a long time, on how do we deal with the challenge of housing. And it's a conversation we've had for long as Kenyans, possibly 25, 30 years of conversation. And I did make a proposition to the people of Kenya that it was necessary for us to do this using our own resources, mobilizing domestic capital for us to be able to undertake our housing program. There was a big debate, but today we have done what we couldn't do with money borrowed from this place and that place, talking to this guy and the other guy and one bank and another one. Using our own domestic resources, today we are building, concluding some of them, 240,000 housing units with a pipeline of 700,000 housing units. We are building hostels for 180,000 students in our universities and Tibet, and we are building 600 modern markets around Kenya with our own resources. Using a housing fund derived from a housing levy, we have signed contracts for $4 billion. $4 billion. Not a single shilling borrowed from anybody. Domestic resources built by Kenyans, raised from Kenya. Believing in ourselves. I make this case firmly that the challenges we face, the aspirations we have for the future, we have the solutions within us. And that's why I'm very happy that we have in our midst not just Africa Finance Corporation, we have the leadership of Afrexim Bank, we have the leadership of Shelter Afrique, we have the leadership of ADB, we have the leadership of Trade and Development Bank. These are institutions that we must mark for the future, and we must invest in them and work with them. Look, Nigeria has been a producer of oil for all the years that we know. Yet, when you went to Nigeria, there were queues of people looking for fuel in petrol stations for a long time. Until one African stepped forward and built a refinery, Aliko Dangote here. The solution wasn't in Europe. It wasn't in Asia. The solution was in Nigeria. For a problem that disturbed Nigeria for years. I dare say, ladies and gentlemen, we have in this room, we have the political leadership, we have the industrialists, we have the financiers to transform our continent, and we must waste no time looking any further. In Kenya, we have established a national infrastructure fund and are in the process of creating a sovereign wealth fund, following in the footsteps of some of our peers on the continent, including, I know, what has been done in Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, and in many other places. Through these instruments, we aim to mobilize public and private, as well as domestic and foreign capital, to fund major priority projects in the tune of $40 billion over the next decade. When you heard my minister here speak, he said, we already have mobilized $3 billion just in a short span. And we are looking at the people in this room, how we are going to work together to leverage that money so that we can drive the issues we are discussing here. Infrastructure, transport, logistics, infrastructure. Because Kenya's infrastructure ambition are bold. We seek to expand our road network by over 28,000 kilometers, more than double what we have today over the next 7 years. We also aim to generate an additional 10,000 megawatts, nearly 3 times our current installed capacity. And that is to support modern technology, power industrialization, and sustain economic expansion. At the same time, we are strengthening our export-led agricultural transformation and food security through large-scale irrigation anchored on the construction of at least 50 mega dams to bring an additional 2.5 million acres of land under productive use. Listening to my friend, the CEO of AFC, he did mention very clearly that we have some of the largest agricultural lands in our continent. How do we leverage on those? Why is Africa still a hungry continent? Why is Africa still defined by hunger and imports from all manner of places when we can do it right here? These are not merely national priorities. They are integral to the broader continental agenda of industrial transformation through manufacturing and value addition. For far too long, the economic destiny of our continent has been shaped by others. While historical injustices from colonialism to inequities in the global economic order are real, we must also acknowledge that other regions have faced similar challenges, but they have risen above them. We're not the only ones that have faced these challenges. We are constrained, however, only by the extent that we accept the status quo through acquiescence, complacency, and limited ambition. Too often, as a continent, we have settled for what is rather than what could be. For far too long, we have accepted the average, the ordinary. That must change, good people. We must raise the scale of our ambition and refuse to be defined by what is merely functional. The time has come for Africa to take full control of its destiny. Many of the nations we admire today, from Singapore to South Korea and even Japan, once stood where we stand today, constrained and uncertain of their place in the world. But they made choices that made the difference. Through disciplined leadership, bold policy, and unrelenting commitment to progress, they rewrote their future. And they did not do so over centuries. They did so within a single generation. In just 3 to 4 decades, they moved from fragility to strength, from limitation to global competitiveness. That is the lesson before us, good people. Transformation is neither accidental nor a miracle. It is deliberate, it is intentional, and it is entirely within reach if we have the resolve to pursue it, to reach higher, and to reject the average. This is our assignment as the current generation of Africans, leaders, business people, entrepreneurs. This is our assignment. And this is the job that we must do without equivocation, without wavering, and without hesitation. It is now, ladies and gentlemen, or never. We must get it right. And I'm very happy that we are meeting at a time like this, when it is so obvious to us that we are paying very high prices because of a war in the middle of nowhere, which we have no control over, when we could as well have our own resources here. I want to thank President Museveni for refusing to accept easy choices. He had a choice. He had a choice to allow the oil in Uganda to go the way others would have wanted. But I remember having a conversation with President Museveni, and allow me, Mzee, to say this. When I visited him once, and I asked him, Mzee, what's going to happen about the oil reserves that you have, because it's taken time. And I remember Mzee telling me, look, young man, then I wasn't even president. He told me, you see, some of these people you see here, if we give them a chance, they will sell this oil at a throwaway price and go and buy perfume. Those are his words. And they have never left my mind. A case of people making shortcuts, easy decisions, and in the process, sabotaging the destiny of a nation and a region. I am happy that we will be discussing how we are going to use our resources, whether it is the oil we have in our region or the minerals we have in our region, not to export to others, but to industrialize our own region, our countries. When the other day we divested from Kenya Pipeline because we wanted to unlock the value of Kenya Pipeline and use it for the transformation of the country, President Museveni called me and said, I want to buy 50% of Kenya Pipeline. And he told me, I don't care the price. That's how serious he was. When some other pessimists in Kenya were saying, oh, the price is very high, I don't know. President Museveni could see beyond the price. He could see the opportunity of transforming our nation, our region together. Mzee, I want to assure you that the same way you invested in Kenya Pipeline, Kenya is going to invest in your refinery and in the future of our resources together. And hopefully we can bring all the other countries in our region to see the value, not in the short-term benefit you get from something cheap from somewhere else, but in the benefit of building something for the future that will not only earn you money today, but earn you opportunities tomorrow. I run the risk of monopolizing this meeting, and it is not my intention to do so, and I don't want to spoil things for AFC. But allow me, ladies and gentlemen, now to take this opportunity to invite our elder, President Museveni, to come and share with us his wisdom. Mzee, karibu.
Hello, hello. You can hear me? Very good. His Excellency President Ruto, the leaders of the AFC, all the other distinguished persons who are here, ladies and gentlemen, I'm glad you have allowed me to speak when I'm seated here, because in doing my push-ups, I strained my back, and I really want to talk to you comfortably, not in a hurry. I want to thank His Excellency President Ruto for organizing this conference, and the AFC for organizing it under the patronage of President Ruto. We have got a minister in Uganda, is called Otafuire. The Bantu ways of naming people, you gave a name which is actually a sentence. So Otafuire means that if you don't die, you will see good things in the end. Therefore, by not dying and having been involved in public affairs for the last 65 years, since 1960, I'm now going to beginning to see some waking up. When the manager from AFC was speaking, I said, this man is speaking my language now. And he's a bureaucrat. But he's speaking a language of revolution. This has been our problem. The discrepancy between revolution and betrayal, really, because Africa has been betrayed in the last 70 years. Sudan was the first to get independence in 1955. It is now 70 years since we started getting independence. But you look at the GDP of Africa. The GDP of Africa is now 3.6 trillion. All of us, imagine, the whole of Africa. Egypt, South Africa, Algeria, all of us. 3.6 trillion. And we are 1.5 billion people now. And our land area is umushandete kawaya umusho are mugambire. I'm speaking in Kikuyu, you will not understand. So, the land area of Africa is 4 times the size of the United States. And our population is now 5 times the population of the United States of America. But our GDP is 3.6 trillion, and GDP of the USA is 32 trillion. So, all of us together, in terms of wealth, are only 10% of the wealth of the United States. This is a big shame. Why should this be the case? There's been some talk that there was no other way in the past. I don't believe that. If you look at China, you people, you can go and get the figures. China was very, very poor, very underdeveloped when the communists took over. But they were able, because of discipline and clarity, were able to save and start investing in their economy, even when they were still very poor. So it is ideological. It's not just money. It's not money. This is more than money. We had a conference here about 10 years ago, here in Nairobi, here, with the Prime Minister of Japan, who died, the one who died. We had a conference here. And in that conference, I made this written speech, which they would distribute to the delegations. And in this speech, I pointed out that, and I'm glad the speaker is here, His Excellency President Ruto, the person from the IFC, our commissioner, the man from the islands, the minister, who originally came from Uganda long ago. They all talked about it. We should not look at these issues in isolated ways. This was the problem in the 1960s and even 70s. They would pick one item, rural development. Then they talk about that, talk about that, talk about that. Then after some time, they say, no. Women empowerment. Then women empowerment. Then education. Then just like that. But in that speech, I pointed out that in my view, there are 10 strategic bottlenecks. And I can repeat them for you here. Number 1, is ideological orientation. Because we are talking of interregional infrastructure. But how will you have interregional infrastructure if there are wars going on? And these wars are based on ideological bankruptcy. People believe in sectarianism. They believe in the politics of identity, of tribe, of religion. The wars which are going on in the Middle East, what is their ideological base? What are they fighting for? We know all those people. The Iranians, the Israelis, the Americans, we know all of them. We have good relations with them. But you can see that the mistakes which they have in their thinking is the one which causes all this suffering. Mistakes, ideological. What is crucial? Is it because I am a Munyankore? You see, that's why I was speaking in Kikuyu. I wanted somebody to bring me my coffee. So, in my view, I welcome these very good technical, professional ideas about infrastructure. But I think if we only focus on infrastructure alone, we may not go far. Because there are wars. There are wars in Congo, there are wars in South Sudan, there are wars in all these different places, Somalia. So how will you have infrastructure if people are fighting for wrong reasons? Therefore, strategic obstacle number one in this booklet, which I will give you, was ideological disorientation. Why do you believe in tribalism and religious sectarianism? I am a cattle keeper. I'm like these Maasais who are dancing here. I produce milk. I produce beef. I produce bananas. But people in my tribe don't buy from me. Why? Because they also have the same products. I have milk, they have milk. They don't buy from me, I don't buy from them. I have beef, they have beef. So who buys from me? The people of Kampala, many of whom are not my tribe. The people of East Africa. So my prosperity is supported more by Uganda as a country and East Africa and Africa than by my own small group. If therefore you have somebody killing people just because of religion or tribes, how will you have the corridors we are talking about? That is strategic obstacle number one, which we pointed out here when we met here with Mr. Abe, the Prime Minister of Japan. Because of number one, because of ideological fragmentation, then you end up with weak states. No army. Why is there insecurity in Africa? Some of these countries have no armies. Why don't they have an army? Because they cannot build one. Why? Because or ideology. You want to have a highly paid army when you don't have money. How will you have an army? In Uganda, we fought for no money for 17 years. From 1971 to 1987, I was fighting for no pay, for patriotism. So how will you have a paid army when you don't have money? You don't have the state to pay. So therefore, because of that, and then when you recruit soldiers, instead of joining the national army, they join the clan armies like in Somalia. Now, if you don't have army, you don't have police, how would you have peace? So, number one, ideological disorientation leads to number two, weak states. Then you come to the underdevelopment of the human resource, education. There, many Africans have gone to school now. Many of them are We have got more educated people than before. But they need these other factors. But in some cases, it is also a problem. Then number 4 is what we are talking about here. We talked about this here 10 years ago. What we are talking about now, the infrastructure, is number 4 here in this booklet. It is very true that if you don't have infrastructure, how will you have industrialization? How will you have modernization? Now, on infrastructure, we are moving very well now. From the comments of His Excellency President Ruto, from the comments of the AFC, we are all moving in the right direction. The only clarification I want to make is that there are core cost pushers. If you want your economy to succeed, you must identify the core cost pushers, which push costs in production. One of them is transport. Transport, especially the railway and the water transport. So if you build the railway, you must build it with either government money, who are not looking for high profits and quickly, or with patient capital, patient private capital. Because if you have got very high cost of transport of the railway, how will you compete? How will you compete? How will the companies make money? The other cost pusher is electricity. In Uganda, my people behind my back, they made a mistake and they went with a group called what? I don't know what they called them. And they built a dam, one of the dams on the Nile, using private money. When it came to the price of the electricity, production was 16 cents per kilowatt hour. How can you make money? How can that electricity help the economy? Well, it almost caused a civil war because they didn't tell me, they went behind my back. But the dams were built with government money. We are able to produce electricity at 4.8 cents, American cents per kilowatt hour. Then the old dams, the ones we have already paid for, the cost is 1.2 cents, American cents. So there, you must be very careful. It must either be government money or patient capital, not people who are looking for quick money. Then the next, it is the railway and electricity and water transport. And then the cost of money in the banks. That's why in Uganda, I had to keep the Uganda Development Bank. I privatized the Uganda Commercial Bank because they persuaded me that they confused me. They said, if you privatize, private capital is efficient, they will do what? I said, okay. But you know, I am a bushman. So I go cautiously. So I said, okay, you take the Uganda Commercial Bank. They privatized it. The interest rate is now 25%. How can somebody, that's how you get what His Excellency was talking about, the perfume importers. They are the ones who make money from 25% interest loans. A manufacturer cannot make profit with 25%. Or a farmer So, rail transport, electricity, cost of money for manufacturing and agriculture. I would want you to look at it. The cost of labor is still not high. Cost of labor, the salaries are not still high. Those are not a problem. Now it comes down to the pipeline. I would not have bothered His Excellency Ruto so much for fuel, especially people who are driving on the road. If the fuel is expensive, don't travel, stay at home. Where are you going? I'm not really worried about you. What I was worried about was jet fuel. Because jet fuel is not only just for travel, it is for tourism. If the cost of the jet fuel is very expensive, the tourists will not come. It is for export, because the aircraft also export. So that's why I had to disturb His Excellency Ruto that the governments need to keep a voice in the pipeline. The governments of Kenya, government of Uganda must keep a voice in the pipeline, mainly because for the jet fuel. People are going for nightclubs, I don't care so much about them. If you don't have the money, stay at home. Where are you going? So therefore, with the infrastructure, but for instance, for the roads, once we have got enough infrastructure of the railway and the water, because there's also water transport, Lake Victoria, the River Nile, Lake Albert. Once we have those, the railway, electricity, for the roads, we can actually have toll roads. Yeah. That's what I'm telling our American friends. Come and make money on the toll roads. I will not welcome you in the railway if you are greedy for profits. But for the toll roads, you build the road and charge it. Those who can pay, those who can use the smaller national roads. So that's what I would say on the infrastructure. Now, the other bottleneck, because of these bottlenecks, then you end up what our leaders were talking about here. Export of raw materials, unprocessed. When you export unprocessed, when you export cotton unprocessed as lint, you get $1.2 per kilogram. That 1 kilogram, if you make cloth out of it and garments, you will get $15. The same kilogram for which you got 1.2. If you weave, you spin, weave, and get garments out of it, you'll get $15. Coffee. A kilo of coffee unprocessed is $2.5. The same kilo processed will go for $25 or even $40. So the Africans have been the mega donors. I don't know why they are never called in conferences for donors in Paris, because they are the mega donors. In every kilogram of coffee, you are donating $40. And they don't know. You find the African there putting on ties, moving around. They are not bothered. So therefore, without electricity, without the railway, you cannot industrialize. and you go on with the raw materials. That's why you have got this stunted economy. The other day, I was with the delegation of military people from Tanzania. They gave me a word of stunted in Swahili. Does somebody have that word in Swahili kabisa? Stunted growth. Mtoto ambaye hakue. They told me, but I forgot. Last night I was with the delegation from Tanzania. I know it in my language, kuningama. But get it in Swahili. So the African economy is stunted. Stunted because of these mistakes, because of these hemorrhages. Then, number 6, fragmented market. If you produce, who buys? I've told you that my tribe cannot help me with, I am a capitalist also. I sell my milk. But in Uganda, it is bought by the Ugandans in Kampala. Not in my tribal area so much. Then East Africa. That's why I've been begging His Excellency Ruto, my young sister Samia, please, ruhusu maziwa yangu yaje huko bila vizuizi. Now, if you don't have a market, how will you attract capital? And the ones who invest in your country, how will they succeed? China opened in 1978. I'm comfortable, I'm all right. China, I have the figures here by that time. China opened in 1978, opened the economy. Our African economies were open all the time, all that time. But by the time I made this speech here, 10 years ago when we were with the Prime Minister of Japan here, by that time China had attracted $2.6 trillion, while Africa had attracted only $0.65 trillion. Why? One of the magnets is the big Chinese market inside China. One of the big magnets of attracting. So, to go on with this fragmented economy is a very big mistake. And that's why I'm very happy with His Excellency Ruto denouncing the tariff barriers that stop trade among our countries. Then the other bottleneck here, underdeveloped services, tourism, banking, professional services, and so on. Underdeveloped agriculture, number 8, bottleneck number 8. Uganda has got a little bit of agriculture. We never import food. So when I saw people crying that there was a war in Ukraine, is the war in Uganda here? It's in Ukraine. Why are you crying? Or that we shall have no food to eat. Not in Uganda, we always eat. We have enough food. We have got so much food that we don't know where to put it. Market is our problem. But in other parts of Africa, you get this problem of no food. Amazing. And the food they buy from outside is very dangerous. Bad food, with hormones and so on. Now, in the 1960s, we had made some mistakes also. We, the African people. You must have heard that in Uganda, Idi Amin grabbed private capital, the property of the Indians. And in other countries, they had a practice of what they were calling nationalization, kutaifisha. That one also was a mistake, strategic mistake. But I'm glad that when we came into government, because I was from the revolutionary side, I had enough credentials to say no, give back all the property of the Indians. Let them get their properties back. Because my people, some of them are here, they were saying, no, we must keep the properties of Indians. I said, but if you don't give back the Indians their properties, who will trust you that in the future, if you invest in your country, you will not also grab his property, that like you grabbed the one of the Indians. So I persuaded them, we gave back all the property of the Indians, miserable properties, just 4,000 of them. Not much. Serani too. Now, around Kampala alone, in the whole of Uganda, we had only 4,000 Asian properties. 4,000 in the whole of Uganda. But now around Kampala alone, we have got 2 million properties of the Ugandans, plus also our Indians who came back. So that was also another mistake. You, the people, should remember that issue of confiscating properties of private sector was one of the mistakes that delayed us. Now, finally, of course, the final bottleneck was lack of democracy, because that was also another problem. Because if you don't have, I see some people trying to say democracy is a luxury. No, democracy forces you to be accountable, to go to the people and win their support. Recently we had elections, and where my people listened to my advice, we performed very well. Because when they implement what we like, getting rid of poverty in the whole country. How can you preserve poverty in the whole country? It's not a national park that you are preserving. So now, therefore, I want to conclude by saying that we have the money here. Yes, we are getting more money. Now our speaker from AFC gave a very good example. The pension funds, what are they being used for? NSSF in Uganda has got a lot of money, but they just invest in treasury bills. The government borrows from national fund and eats the money. They borrow for eating. So, our expert has really challenged you people. You heard him, that the NSSF money should be not for eating. Because if you treasury bills, they are borrowing to pay debts, to pay salaries, to pay what? They are not borrowing for I call infrastructure omsomyo in our language. Omsomyo means the bone marrow. You know, the English don't have enough words. They couldn't describe that part of the body. The bone marrow, they call it bone marrow. But in our language, we call it omsomyo or omshokoro in one of the other languages. So, the omshokoro of the economy is the railway, transport, electricity, the cost of, plus of course peace and so on. So if the NSSF money is used for eating, not to build part of the bone marrow, because the English don't have enough words, it's a very big mistake. But also, the government, our countries can deliberately save. We have been funding we set up a science innovation fund where I have been funding government innovations. We have built an electric vehicle called Chira motor vehicle, and its sister vehicles, the bus and the other smaller. We had to build our own vehicles because I had begged the Japanese to come and assemble in Uganda. They refused. So I said, okay, bye-bye. Now, when I started making my vehicles, some of the Japanese came. So want to assemble. I said, no, too late. I will not allow any assembly in Uganda. You must manufacture, not assemble. The vaccines, we have been funding them ourselves. I'm going to launch an anti-tick vaccine the day after, a few days to come. So we have the capital. It's not enough, but we have it. If we constrain consumption, we can get the capital. So therefore, I'm very happy with the initiative of His Excellency Ruto. Like on the issue of the refinery, what he told you, in Uganda, I have banned the export of unprocessed minerals. All of them, I have banned them. They have been praying for me to die or something like that, but no export of tin, no export of copper. They are all there in the ground. But slowly we are getting investors. Iron ore. Can you imagine? Some Indian guy from India, the New Delhi, had come to made a deal with my people to sell our iron ore at $47 per ton. The iron ore of Uganda is the best in the whole world. It is about 70% pure. So, when you sell iron ore, somebody goes and makes it into steel. He earns, at one time he would earn $900. And you export all the jobs. But I stopped them. And I'm glad that some of the investors from Kenya, encouraged by His Excellency Ruto, are now investing in the steel industry in Uganda. Now, on the issue of petroleum, we found it long ago, 2005. But up to now, it's now about to come out of the ground. What was the reason? Disagreeing with the oil companies, Total. They were telling my people who would tell me, refineries don't make money. Hey, they don't make money. How about the ones who build them? Why do they build them? Then when I checked, the refinery in Uganda actually is very, very profitable. Do you have somebody from that sector? From energy? Do you have somebody here? Minister, do you remember the internal rate of return? Huh? 14. You'll confirm. Or you're going to confirm. The internal rate of return is very high of the refinery in Uganda. So, but because I'm also tactical, because the Total were insisting that they should take all the oil. Why do you take the oil? The users are here. Why do you take it? So, no, there's no money in the refinery. I said, no, you are lying. Now, eventually we agreed that we build a small refinery of 60,000 barrels per day. What do you call this? You build, then you add on. There's a way they say it in English. You build one unit, then you add on. Add on another 60,000, and that my refinery would have first score on the oil, and then the balance you can export through Tanzania. It's fine. Now recently, and then that ECOP, it's now called ECOP, East African Pipeline. Later on, we could see that people of Congo could use it if they want, because there's some oil there on the other side. People in South Sudan can use it, because they have got oil there. Now, this oil of the Carabat is one of the 5 provinces. We have got 4 other provinces of oil. This is just one of them. So therefore, the 13%, the internal rate of return is 1.3. Okay. And what is the internal rate of return of others in the world? Find out. So therefore, when His Excellency Ruto recently sent me a message, I supported it, that the surplus oil, which we had given to Total to take through Tanga to I don't know where, be our contribution to the refinery in Tanga, number 1. Then later on, we can add the petroleum from the other Congo, from South Sudan, and also these other provinces, because the one of Uganda, where we have the oil now, is only 40% of the Arbat area. There is another 60% which we have not which is not yet fully explored. So there's more oil in Uganda, both within Arbat and in the other provinces. So therefore, I support this idea of the Tanga refinery. We shall maintain our small refinery because we have already gone ahead. We are very far. We can't stop. The question is, how do you those refineries, if you don't want to create kwa Kiswahili tunasema wivu, jealous. Tunasema wivu, if you don't want wivu, it's better that if the countries have ownership together, like in because that's what we were doing in the past. We were calling it East African Common Services. We are owning the ports together, East African harbors, East African Railway, East African Airways, East African Development Bank. It was all East African. If it is all ours, then it is ours. Then it is not either me or you. Hakuna kushindana. You are all together. So with these few words, you should be careful. Don't invite old men for